Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to Goodable Live, your home for everything good on the internet. We've got a great live newscast for you today. It is our first ever live stream on YouTube. We're so excited to be on this platform, thanks to our amazing partnership with our partners over at Google. Some of you are tuning in right now, and while you're tuning in, you're also looking at your phones or your news feeds, and you are seeing a steady stream of scary images, negativity, war, injuries, politics, and all sorts of things that are stemming out of something that happened just over a week ago when Russia invaded Ukraine. Those images are scary for us as adults, but even more scary and more confusing to young children. At Goodable, we are not political. We do not take sides in any conflict. The only side that we are very open and bold about is taking the side of goodness. And it's very difficult in a conflict zone to understand who is on the side of right and who is on the side of wrong. That's for people who are a lot smarter than we are. What we are very good at is finding acts of goodness. And part of that is helping people understand the conflict in a different way. And we are super excited to be joined by Dr. Dillon Browne. Dr. Browne is a professor of psychology at Waterloo University here in Canada, right here in Ontario. He is also Waterloo's research chair in child and family clinical psychology, and he specializes in research that looks at stress, adversity, and hardship, and how that affects entire families, and how that trauma not only affects families, but entire generations of families. And we sat back and we thought, you know what is the best way for us to speak to young children about what's happening in Ukraine and the crisis that's unfolding there amid the 24-hour nonstop headlines of bad things? And Dillon is the best person to be addressing that. So, Dillon, thank you for being our first guest on our first ever Goodable Live. We're so glad to have you here.
Very exciting. Thanks for having me.
I want to jump right into this. Now, I have children. A lot of people out who are watching this will have children. And we really struggle with how to explain traumatic events like this to young children without sort of emotionally scarring them. So let me start by asking you, what on earth do you say to a young child to inform them or tell them, or even they might be asking about what's happening in Ukraine?
Yeah, so I think one of the first things we need to operationally define is what young is.
Hmm.
So, for example, some people might consider a 5-year-old young, some people might consider a 17-year-old young. Developmentally, a 5 and a 17-year-old are quite different in terms of the types and sorts of information they can manage. So, for children under the age of 5, we're recommending now that parents really have a think around how much, if anything, they want to be discussing around the Ukraine conflict with very young children, and there I'm referring to children under the age of 5. If parents decide that they do want to discuss this with young children, or that their toddlers and early children have questions about the conflict, they might say something along the lines of, right now, one country isn't really being very nice to another country and is trying to take things from the other country, and that's really upsetting people right now.
And
And
sorry, go ahead.
uh, and I was going to say that might do the trick for now, but please follow up. Yeah.
So I guess another follow-up question to that is one of the challenges with the news and the information that we receive is that it's everywhere. If your child is on Facebook or any form of social media, whether they choose to or not, the high likelihood is that they will be inundated with some very negative images about the war, images of suffering and refugees, and quite frankly, even children that have a scared look on their face. What's your best advice for how to manage or sort of oversee or maybe even filter the stream of information that your child receives?
Yeah, and so this goes to what I was going to describe in terms of children who are slightly older, say from late childhood all the way up to adolescence and emerging adults. We know that the vast majority of children are online, and I'm sure many of the viewers are watching the Ukraine conflict online right now. And yeah, there are many graphic and upsetting images. So for those children, I guess my primary recommendation to families is that avoidance is not a strategy. There is this misconception that by discussing anything related to scary or frightening or challenging issues, we might perpetuate uh, negative feelings and distress, and that actually doesn't follow from the evidence. In fact, avoidance is probably the worst, one of the worst strategies, because inevitably those emotions will show up somewhere else. Now, you mentioned filtering. That's not to say that we need to overdo things. However, we know that children are being exposed to this content online. You might not want to have the TV on in the background 24/7, but having a direct conversation about this is definitely important.
Can you walk me through the psychological effect that exposure to these images or videos or news headlines has on a child? And I know a child is a very broad definition, so walk us through maybe a couple of different scenarios.
Yeah, for some children, there might not be very much of an impact at all. It's possible that for some children, they're more preoccupied with other things that are happening in their lives right now. For other children, these sorts of things might be quite upsetting. And working as a therapist, I know that even in the last week, young people are wondering about what's going on. For some children, there might be a response of psychological distress. And what do I mean by that? Higher levels of anxiety, perhaps irritability, some sadness, confusion, and maybe even a fear of, could something like this happen here?
What are some of those signs to look for in a child if they're suffering some sort of distress?
So anything that represents a marked difference from how the child typically operated previously. So common signs or clues of anxiety and depression might be a change in sleep patterns, change in eating patterns. Emotional problems, including anxiety and depression in children, often manifest as irritability. So if a parent feels like you're suddenly walking on eggshells where that previously wasn't the case, those sorts of things might be signs that things are kind of getting problematic.
You are trying to get help for kids who have close ties to Ukraine. Tell me about what you're working on.
So right now, a number of mental health professionals across the country are surveying the mental health service provider community to determine uh, if there is a critical mass of service providers that would be willing to provide free mental health services to Ukrainian Canadians that are affected by the conflict. Unfortunately, mental health services are not universally funded in this country, and those that are funded have extremely long wait times. Like, I'm talking upwards of a year. So right now it's still early days, but people are kind of working around the clock to try and mobilize a force that can get services to Ukrainian Canadians both cheap and quickly.
Um, there might be some families out there that will be showing this live stream to their children or hoping to use it to inform how they speak with children. I want to ask if I can put you slightly on the spot
Mhm.
and speak directly to, say, somebody who's under 10 years old who might be watching this or who might be afraid. What would you say?
Yeah, I would say the feelings that you're having right now make sense. There's nothing wrong with the way that you're feeling. Adults are feeling this way too. We're feeling scared, we're feeling frightened, we're feeling sad, and we're also feeling angry that something like this is happening. So, number one is the validation piece. And then moving on to describing some facts. So, the Ukraine is very far away from the country of Canada. And I know this is going beyond Canada. So, assuming that that makes sense for where the listener is, this is happening in a place very far away. And it's highly unlikely that anything like this would ever happen here. And I just want you to know that all the adults in your life are here to keep you safe. And we love you very much.
Let me ask you a follow-up question and trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody who's under 10. Dr. Browne, why are they killing innocent people?
We don't always have answers to all of the questions, and many adults are asking the same thing right now. And to be honest with you, I don't know the answer. However, I do know that there's a lot of good things happening right now too. For example, there are nurses right now in the Ukraine that are helping babies be born while underground in subways. And there are also nurses and other healthcare providers like doctors who are helping sick children get their treatment for their cancer. So while we don't know the answers, we do know that people are helping.
Dr. Browne, is everything going to be okay?
All of the adults in your life, including your parents or your parent or your caregiver, uh, are here to keep you safe. We're responsible for keeping you safe, and that's what we're doing. Um, as I mentioned, this is happening very far away, and ultimately, things are going to be okay.
One more question, doctor, before we wrap this up, putting my adult shoes back on and my keeping my adult hat still on. Um, for people out there that need help, specifically parents, we don't have the training that you have. We don't have the background. We don't even understand sometimes how the psychology affects young children. If you're a parent out there looking for answers, looking for support, looking for advice, and obviously, like you said, the wait times for treatment or therapy are just incredibly long. What should parents out there be doing, or what are the resources out there?
So, for Ukrainian Canadian families right now, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress has a website that you can Google, and resources are being posted there. The Red Cross posting resources. If you do want to reach out for help and get assistance from a mental health service provider, you can look at the Psychological Association of whatever province or state or country that you're in. Those these days it's quite easy to find mental health service providers on the internet. The challenge can come in regarding whether or not those services are covered. With those parents who have extended health benefits, those are likely covered. Um, but again, keep your eyes peeled for free services that are going to be coming down the pipe for people who are affected by this conflict.
Dillon, we're very grateful for your time. Is there any final word or any advice or anything that we didn't touch on that you would like to share with our viewers?
I just want to reiterate the principle that avoiding difficult conversations is not a tenable strategy for dealing with something like this, especially in this day and age. The news cycle is ubiquitous, it's everywhere, and kids are getting exposed to it. So approach the conversation, make sure that you're regulated first, because this is upsetting us as adults as well. And remember to validate the emotion first. Don't explain it away. This is an opportunity to not only model emotional regulation and coping, it's also a time to model compassion and caring and goodness for all of humanity.
I love that. Tell us and our viewers how they can follow up with you, how they can follow you on social, if they want to keep track of some of the amazing advice and resources that you're making available to others.
Yeah, you can look at my website at the University of Waterloo. It's the Whole Family Laboratory, and our Twitter handle is at Whole Lab. Then that'll be on Twitter.
Perfect. Dillon, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing that advice. If there are any other families out there with children, the cool thing about live streaming on YouTube is that this actually becomes available for posterity and people can come back, hopefully use this as a little bit of a resource, specifically the part about more Dillon, you were sort of almost speaking to a young child. I think that's incredibly valuable. But we are very grateful for your time. Thank you for joining us. And for our viewers, stay tuned because we're planning to make our YouTube live streams a regular occurrence. And while you're at it, we talked about your news diet and how the news is ubiquitous. I would invite people out there to not change channels, but maybe add another channel to your portfolio. And that channel is the Goodable channel. We're available on social media, Twitter at Goodable, Instagram at Goodable News, TikTok at Goodable News, and Facebook as well. We like to think that we're doing a small little service by showing people some of the good things in the world so that we don't get caught up in all of the misery and the politics. But thank you once again, Dillon. It was a pleasure having you on board. And to all of our viewers, keep being amazing people and keep being goodable. Thank you. Dillon, can you still hear me?